So hello everybody, and welcome back here for now our next panel. So I hope you all enjoyed that really interesting presentation from Bruno. I think it's always fascinating to get a bit of context on maybe some of the key use cases that 5G is going to be enabling. So really interesting to hear from Richard in that way, and a great way to start the day. So we're now moving on to have a look at midband spectrum. So we've got two sessions focusing on midband. And this first session, initially, we're going to be looking specifically at the C-band. So I'd like to welcome back Richard. Richard is going to be introducing the panelists and moderating the session. So Richard, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome again to everybody. And I hope you enjoyed the earlier session on VR. I just want to set the scene here a little bit because I think, we're looking at compatibility in this session between 5G and C-band, and we need to remember, of course, C-band is heavily used for satellite broadcasting. And I think there are two things we need to consider. The first of these is calculable. It's the technical issues. We know that depending on the type of LMB, the satellite you're watching, how big your dish is, what kind of 5G base station you have, what power levels you're using, we can do calculations and we can work out based on these kind of factors how far apart we need to space Earth stations from 5G base stations. And the results of those calculations depend on a very wide range of variables, including things like how big the guard band is that we leave, what kind of filters, if we do need to fit filters, that we put on satellite receivers, and potentially filters on 5G transmitters as well. And we get a number. We get a separation distance that tells us how much space we need to leave between the two. And that leads to one further question, because it may be that distance is something we can work with. If we're in a situation where we have nothing in C-band other than a few large telecommunication dishes, then if the calculation says we have to leave a 1 kilometer isolation zone around those few Earth stations, that might be fine. If, on the other hand, the calculation says, well, if you fit a filter and you leave a guard band, you need to leave maybe 100 meters around each C-band receiver. And we're then looking at a city where C-band is used domestically to receive television services. It might be that that means in that whole city, we cannot actually fit 5G services in. So technically, we can calculate what's needed. But there is a second part to this, which is politically, what do we then do? Do we say, okay, in cities, it's more important to have 5G, and we therefore need to forget about C-band satellite reception? Do we say, actually, C-band plays a really important role in cities, and therefore we need to protect it? Do we need to protect it everywhere? Do we just protect telecoms? And you'll see in the polls, there are a couple of questions on this kind of policy side. So we have four very, very interesting and diverse speakers who are going to talk about this topic. And then when they've all had a chance to speak, we're going to get back together. We're going to talk about the issues. We'll take some questions. We'll look at the poll results. So I want to start with Bui Ha Long, who unfortunately has been called away for a meeting with the minister, but we do have his presentation recorded. He's the Deputy Director of Radio Frequency Policy and Planning for the ARFM in Vietnam. And Dan, I believe now we can see his presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bui Ha Long from Authority of Radio Frequency Management from MIC, Ministry of Communication and Information, Vietnam. And first of all, I wish that we all stay safe through this COVID pandemic. And the second, my appreciation to the host of this great conference that I can be here today with all of you. And today I would like to share our case study on rearrange the C-band for 5G deployment in Vietnam. I already prepared a couple of slides for today's topic, and I would like to focus on the technical matter. So please go to the next page. Yes, thank you. For the C-band, you may be familiar with two 3GPP band plan in this frequency range. We have band number 77 that from 3300 to 4200, and we also have the band 78 from 3300 to 3800, and we see that these two bands are very popular for 5G deployment around the world. We can find that more than 25 countries now reportedly to have 5G system in this band, and this band also have a good 5G ecosystem. So that's why not only Vietnam, some other country like European, Korea, Japan, and also US are looking for the opportunity to accommodate the 5G in this frequency range. And ASEAN country and some other country around the world, we can see that the C-band satellite being used for years in the entire range to provide satellite communication and also provide a TV program. And in Vietnam, we have our own satellite network. We have Vinasat-1 that utilizing the frequency from 3400 to 3700, and we also have the frequency for the telemetry, tracking, and control for the two satellite Vinasat-1 and Vinasat-2 around the frequency 3700. And in Vietnam, we also have the footprint from other satellite network from foreign country, from foreign satellite provider to provide their service in our territory. Fortunately, the number of C-band earth stations in Vietnam is not so many. We do the analysis and we see that it's around 1,000 earth stations only. And we endeavor to refarm the FSS frequency to reserve the portion of this band for 5G. With this, the Vinasat-1 frequency will be repacked under the 3600 megahertz, and the other satellite system will be moved up above the 4000 megahertz. And then we try to have the frequency range from 3600 to the 4000 to be dedicated for 5G deployment. With this arrangement, we identify some possible interference scenario between the 5G and the satellite. These are the interference from the in-band 5G and emission into the FSS band. The second one is interference from adjacent band of 5G and emission into FSS band. And the third one is the FSS earth station LNA or LNB overdrive effect. So we believe that we have to address these three interference scenario in order to accommodate the 5G into C-band. In the following slide, we will have some detailed technical information. Yes, thank you. In next slide, in order to do the different technical analysis, it is needed to specify the FSS protection criteria as well as 5G emission limit that we intend to deploy in Vietnam. In regard to the FSS protection criteria, we look at some I2 recommendation, I2 report, and for the 5G we look at the 2GBP technical standard. For the FSS protection criteria, when we look at the recommendation S.1432, we find that there are some criteria for the ION or interference to noise ratio, and we decide that we will select the value of minus 12.2 dB. Correspond to the 6% of the satellite system noise caused by the other system in the co-primary status. We choose this because we believe that the FSS and the 5G or mobile service are the co-primary service in the same band. So we choose this protection criteria. And with this protection criteria, we derive that the maximum permissible interference to Earth station from 5G is something around minus 140.8 dBm per 100 kilohertz. The other thing we should take into account to protect the FSS station is we should avoid the LNA, LNB overdrive. And in the I2R report S.2368 and M.2109, we see that the value of minus 60 dBm is selected to protect the LNA, LNB from overdrive effect. And we also have some other assumption like TTNC antenna height is 15 meter. In regard to the 5G emission limit, we when we study the 3GPP technical specification, we see that there are several type and category of the base station, and we select one specific type and category, that is BS station type 1C and category B for unwanted emission. And we also make some assumptions that the power, the output power and the antenna gain of the macro base station, micro base station, and pico base station. So next page, please. Yes, thank you. This is a simulation result that we conduct recently. We analyze some possible interference cases between the FSS and the 5G with the macro base station, micro base station, and pico base station. And the results show that we need some isolation, and it leading to the protection distance between the 5G and the FSS station. As you can see on the table that for the macro base station, it requires about nearly 100 meters to protect the FSS station from the adjacent emission from the emission of NDIR 5G in the adjacent band, with the gap band 11 megahertz. And for the micro base station, this require only 10 meters, and for pico station is a very small distance. And for the saturation effect to the LNA, LNB, our calculation shows that we need around 3.2 kilometer separation to protect LNA LNB from blocking effect, and we think that this number 3.2 should be the radius of the exclusion zone to protect the Earth station. But for the normal Earth station, I mean, for example, for direct TV to home or the other station in the adjacent band, if we employ the additional filter, the blocking effect will be solved. So the only situation that we have to deal with is to protect the TTNC overdrive effect. For the TTNC, it will be stay in the co-band with the 5G. As you see that I mentioned in previous slide that TTNC frequency is around 3700 megahertz, and the 5G frequency range from 36 to 4000. So that means the TTNC will work in the co-band situation with the 5G. And to protect the TTNC from the co-band interference, it requires some protection distance, as shown in the lower table. It's range from 25 kilometer to 30 kilometer, with the assumption that the base station, the 5G base station antenna is lower than 30 meter. It should be noted that all the calculation and simulation here is based on the free space propagation model. And if the propagation distance is larger than the radio horizon distance, the radio horizon will be taken into account. This is our simulation and calculation result. So please go to next page. Yes, as I mentioned before, that to protect all the Earth station, we need the additional filter. When we do the market analysis, we find that all the LNA in the Vietnam market cannot adapt the requirement to filter out the signal from our band. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have three main measurement reasons from the LNB in Vietnam market and also in US market. It shows that the receiving range from all the LNB are very bigger than the receiving frequency. So it's required to have new FLS receiving filter to be employed in all the FLS station. And we do the calculation and we do the sample filter and make some field trial of this filter, and we find that if we apply the filter with 60 dB rejection for the 5G block, I mean from 3600 to 4000, we can avoid all the blocking effect. In the lower part of this slide, we have two measurement results that on the middle diagram is FS station without the additional filter. We can see that all the 5G signal will fall into the LNA and the receiving. But when we apply the new filter, all the 5G signal will move out. So with our field test, it shows that all the blocking effect be solved with this new filter. So please go to next. Yes, thank you. With all these technical study and film measurement, we would like to provide some wrap-up, and we think that we need some further work. The first thing is to deliver to refarm the 3600 to 4000 megahertz dedicated for 5G is feasible, and we need the transition period for FS. The second thing is we consider to apply the more stringent 3GPP emission limit to 5G base station. That means we select the base station type 1C for the offset of the OBBB, and we also select the category B for the unwanted emission of the 5G base station. Then the third thing is we need the additional bandpass filter for all FNS stations to avoid the overdriver. And we find that when we apply to all the earth station, the overdriver will be gone away. The next one is the coexistence between the 5G and earth station in access band is feasible. No additional interference, no adjacent band interference at all. And regarding to the TTNC station, we believe that is very important station for the satellite network. So we will define the exclusion zone and plus the coordination zone to protect the TTNC. Inside the exclusion zone, no 5G station at all. But in the coordination zone, I mean the blue circle under, the 5G operator have to work with the satellite operator to find out the suitable technical parameter for the 5G base station. And for the exclusion zone, it is around 3.2 kilometers, and for the coordination zone, it's about 25 to 33 kilometers, with the assumption that the 5G antenna is not higher than 30 meters. And we also established the coordination procedure between the 5G antenna and TTNC station to guide both participants, I mean the 5G operator and the satellite operator to follow this procedure in order to facilitate the deployment of 5G. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our case study that we experienced in Vietnam recently, and we hope that we can get the comment or the suggestion in order to improve our proposal to facilitate the coexistence between the 5G and the FSS in the C-band. So that's my my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Long. It's a shame that we're not going to have your input later on, actually, because I have a number of particular questions relating to your discussion. But interesting to see that Vietnam has not just looked at the technical aspects, but is now also trying to measure the performance of the equipment, which I think is really also very important. We're running short, well, we're not running short of time, but we want to keep things moving. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Anwar Korail of the, he's the director of the Research Institute for Advanced Wireless Technologies of the Telkom University in Indonesia. And he's going to talk about 5G in Indonesia and another project on 5G and FSS coexistence. So hopefully we can get even more light shone on this topic. Anwar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and hello everybody. I am Anwar, Khairul Anwar, the director for the Center for Advanced Intelligent Communication in Telkom University. I am here supporting our government, the Ministry of Communication and Information of Indonesia, the MCI, and also to have the company of Indonesia. So I give the title of this talk is on the search of promising techniques for coexistence between 5G and satellite services in the lower C-band or the extended C-band. The next slide, please. Everybody, starting from this slide, first I would like to tell the story first about what we are doing since February 2017. So we started in 2017 about the study of the 5G technologies, and then what kind of services and spectrum, and also the dimension that we should have for 5G in Indonesia. And then after that, we start to look at the frequency band of the C-band, especially the extended C-band, that is the 3.4 until 4.2 gigahertz. And we start to think about the possibility, what kind of technique that we can use for the sharing between 5G and satellite. And then after that, in February 2020, we start the discussion. So the government gather the academia, the industry, and operators, and to discuss about what kind of scenario that we can use for the sharing between 5G and fixed satellite services possible. And then after that, we have the outbreak of pandemic COVID-19, but we start making study on the coexistence between 5G and satellite. And on July 2020, we gather academia, industry, and operators, also the equipment makers, together discussing about how we can make the coexistence possible. And then as the result of those series of discussion, in this month, August 2020, we will actually this week and also next week, we are starting to make experiment for 5G, the coexistence between 5G and fixed satellite services in Bandung, especially in Telkom University in Indonesia. In the slide, everybody can see that we are planning to complete it. This is also still an option that can we make the completion of the experiment and trial here within 2 weeks. So if we can solve this within 2 weeks, and then we may have the result of this coexistence experiment in the end of the August. Otherwise, we will have the planning that is the 4 week or 1 month after that, and in the worst case, we will have the result of the study coexistence between 5G and satellite in the end of this year, that is the December 2020. So everybody, the purpose of this trial is because our government is preparing the 5G regulations carefully, and is trying to solve the coexistence between 5G and satellite by using win-win solutions for both of the system. The next slide, please. Okay. So actually in this slide, I do not want to talk very detail about what is behind them, but I think to understand well why we need the win-win solution, why we need the harmonization between 5G and fixed satellite services, or FSS, because we need to rethinking about the spectral efficiency. So everybody can see from these tables. So we present here at the left hand side. In Indonesia, we have currently at least 5 satellites, and they are operating at extended C-band, and then standard C-band and KU band. And everybody can see here the bandwidth we are using, and also the equivalent capacity in gigabit per second. So you can see here that, for example, the number 1, the extended C-band, we use the total bandwidth of 432 megahertz, and the equivalent capacity is 0.8 gigabit per second. And then if we take the total of them, in Indonesia, we are using 8.6 gigahertz bandwidth for satellite, and we achieve the 17 gigabit per second of the capacity. So you can see here that if we look at the spectrum efficiency for the satellite, let's say that 1.96 bit per second per hertz, or it is close to 2 bit per second per hertz. And how we derived it one is because of, you can see the Shannon capacity here, but actually you don't need to remember all of the equation here, but we need to know what is the difference between them and also the capacity in 5G. So everybody can look at the right-hand side. I wrote here the capacity of 5G. That is approximation of NB1 divided by N, summation 1 until N log 2 of 1 plus MR, and then gamma I, EPN 0. But from them, you can see that the spectral efficiency of 5G is around 50 bit per second per hertz. If we want to reach a 20 gigabit per hertz, that is the EMBB of 5G. And the minimum, according to the ITUR M2410, that is the minimum is 30 bit per second per hertz. Why we have very high spectral efficiency of 5G here? Because in 5G, we have the variable N, where we don't have in satellite, and we have the additional, equivalent parallel gain that is coming from the bandwidth beneficiation of the wireless communications. Because in 5G, we can use non-line of sight and we can use the MIMO, but in satellite, we don't have. But everybody look at the back side of the slide. That is, I saw the, at the right-hand side is 5G and also the satellite. Because of both of them are required, and then I think it is also important for us to think about that. And next slide, please. We are also observing what kind of technique we can use for making the coexistence possible between 5G and satellite. So we observe that there are at least 10 techniques that making it possible. However, we highlight 1, 2, 3. That is the simplest technique that we can use. That is by shielding and then smart antenna, and then the frequency domain extended decoded random access that we learned in 2016 or 2017, the previous years. So everybody here, those technique, even though they are simple, but I think we are also thinking that we need to make the experiment for them, where you can see at the right-hand side here, there is the red shield. This is to protect the satellite from the interference from 5G, but also we those 10 techniques also using the signal processing for both 5G and also the FSS. The next slide, please. Okay, everybody, this is our some recent result of the coexistence study. So actually, we have published this research in the IEEE publications. So I'm sorry if you cannot see clearly the figure here, but there are two things that I want to say. The first is that by using the shield and also the filter, but in that case, in this result, we just use the shield. We can make the distance from 60 kilometers into 2.6 until 4.5 kilometers in rural area for the received signal strength until minus 100 dBm. And then after that, using the natural shield, we can make it into 8 kilometers. And then for the smart antenna, if we are using the third technique, the smart antenna, we can make the even 100 meters variation is possible from originally 900 meter. Okay, the next slide. Okay, So everybody, this is what I have just talked, that starting from this week, we are going to make experiment of the trial in our university. So we decided to make around 17 scenarios. And then you can see here, this is the location of our university, and then some pictures of our scenarios where the 5G and also the satellite. Satellite in this case is we are using in the moving car, such that we can evaluate the interference to them when close to the 5G base station and when we are far from the 5G base station. And then we use the Telkom 3S satellite and Telkom Merah Putih satellite for this experiment. And we are expecting that we can complete this minimum 2 weeks and maximum this is maybe 4 months. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so as the conclusions, Indonesia has started on the study of the coexistence between 5G and satellite since 2017, where the coexistence result will be evaluated this month, and we are expecting that this result will be the keyword for the next step and careful decisions in Indonesia. And then 5G has a very high spectrum efficiency of minimum 30 bit per second per hertz. And then even though satellite is having around 2 bit per second per hertz, but satellite is also important in our country. That's why win-win solution or harmonization is needed in our country. There are at least 10 techniques for the coexistence between 5G and satellite, where we found that 3 techniques are very promising and simple. And then finally, experiment by Telkom Group this month. It's expected to be successful, and we are welcome to any suggestion from the audience. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Anwar. Fascinating, and another study looking at some of the options, and again, some very interesting questions arising from that. Let's keep things moving because we want to try and get some of those interesting questions that are coming in on the chat towards the end and give chance for discussion. So let me hand over to Siti Hajar, who's a specialist in spectrum policy for Axiata in Malaysia. And Hajar is going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of 5G and why C-band of all the bands that we might decide to look at for 5G services. Hajar, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Richard. First of all, thank you for having me to share my thoughts from the mobile perspective. Before that, I would just like to apologize as I didn't prepare a presentation for this. So what I will just do is I'm just going to go talk through my points. A very good afternoon and evening, depending on where you are. For those who might not know who Axiata Group Berhad is, Axiata Group is we are an is an Asian group of telecommunication company. We're based in Malaysia. We have operations across 11 countries, mainly in Southeast Asia and South Asia market. We have a diverse portfolio ranging from mobile network operations, communications infrastructure services, as well as digital services. Now, why C-band is important to mobile operators? Just to set the scene, I'll briefly run through what 5G technology is. 5G is mainly driven by 3 main use cases. The first being the ultra-reliable, low-latency communication. This is where strict requirements on latency and reliability required for mission-critical communication, such as remote surgery and autonomous vehicle. The second main use case is the massive machine-type communication, supporting a very large number of devices and connections in an area where data is sent sporadically, such as the Internet of Things. Thirdly, enhanced mobile broadband use case. It is a data-driven use cases requiring a high data rates across a wide coverage area. Enhanced mobile broadband use cases is also the first 5G use case to be delivered. It is said to have a capability of delivering a peak download speed of at least 20 gigabits per second with a reliable 100 gigabits per second of user experience data rate. as well as a latency of 4 milliseconds. Now, given the different potential use cases and the expected network delivery or requirements, mobile operators require a mix of different spectrum frequency bands in order to deliver these services. We require access frequency in the low band. These are frequency below 1 gigahertz range. This is important to support the coverage for longer distances across urban, suburban, as well as rural areas. We also require access to frequency in the mid-band. This is between 1 to 6 gigahertz range, and this is where 3.5 gigahertz band is. The mid-band offers a very good balance of coverage as well as capacity benefits. And thirdly, we require access to frequency in the high band. This is frequency bands above 6 gigahertz. Example would be 26 and 28 gigahertz, also known as the millimeter wave band, another primary band for 5G. These high bands are required or needed to meet the ultra-high broadband speeds. Now, zooming in into the mid-band, which is the subject of our discussion today, 3.5 gigahertz is identified as the core band suitable to deliver 5G. Apart from its key technical characteristic, which I've mentioned earlier, providing a good balance of coverage and capacity capability. In addition to that, there's also a potential
I think we seem to have lost the feed from Hajar, unfortunately. If that's not coming back, there's Dan.
I think what we'll do is let's go on to Mohammed, and we can hopefully get Hajar back to conclude. Actually, no, I can see Hajar's actually back, so let's try bringing Hajar back up. We'll try one more time, I can.
Sorry?
We lost you, Hajar. Sorry, I'll pass you over, but yeah, I think we can hear you loud and clear again now. So
we lost you about a minute ago, so if you want to just rewind slightly.
A few minutes ago.
No more than a minute.
I'll just continue.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
All right, sorry about that. So I was just talking about how much is needed in the mid-band. It is estimated that around 80 to 100 megahertz of contiguous spectrum per operator is required. And just to recap, yesterday, a presentation by GSMA shows that a reduction from 100 megahertz to 60 megahertz spectrum bandwidth will result in 64% increase of cell sites. So what this simply means is that wider channels mean fewer base stations, and hence you can see a lower cost of deployment. Moving on, we all know the importance of spectrum harmonization, which is achieved through the activities and works of WRC. The identification of part of the range was achieved at WRC 07. A much broader identification was later achieved at WRC 15 with a harmonized IMT identification for 3.4 to 3.6 throughout Region 1 and Region 2 and in many countries in Region 3. These include Australia, Bangladesh, China, India, New Zealand, Philippines, just to name a few. This positive momentum of wider support for C-band identification is actually a good indication that global harmonization is possible in C-band. In fact, in agenda item 1.2 for WRC 2023, the C-band is making a comeback where 3.3 to 3.4 and 3.6 to 3.8 are to be considered for IMT identification. Although these are only applicable in Region 1 and Region 2, nevertheless, I think we should actually consider these developments to further underscore the value and importance of C-band. But again, of course, we're not ruling out the fact that there are other frequencies in the mid-band that are suitable for 5G, such as 2.3, 2.6, as well as 4 gigahertz. In fact, these bands are actually considered as the next 5G band after 3.5 gigahertz. However, if we want to take advantage of early and successful deployment of 5G, 3.5 gigahertz is your best option. where ecosystem readiness in terms of availability of devices and equipments are far more mature than the others. There are a number of countries that have went ahead and assigned 3.5 gigahertz to mobile operators. In APAC region, South Korea, Australia have assigned the 3.5 gigahertz, I think, back in 2018. This is followed by Hong Kong, Japan, and China somewhere in 2019. And Singapore being the latest in the region to assign 3.5 gigahertz to mobile operators somewhere in June 2020. And I think we can expect more countries in the APAC region to assign 3.5 gigahertz in the next a year or two, as we are also seeing positive development in Thailand, where discussions are currently ongoing to allocate 300 megahertz, 3.4 to 3.7 to mobile operators. And just to not hear that the first 5G spectrum auction in Thailand took place earlier this year, where we saw 700, 2.6 and 26 gigahertz were assigned. In Malaysia, where I am now, through the works of a national 5G task force group, a recommendation was put forward to allocate 400 megahertz to mobile operator. However, as today, we're still waiting for the official and final decision from the regulator on this issue. We acknowledge that there are challenges, particularly in the ASEAN countries, where 3.5 gigahertz are extensively being used by satellite services. I think, nevertheless, it has been shown in some countries that coexistence of the two services are possible, such as demonstrated by the Hong Kong and China, as well as Singapore. And just a while ago, we had Vietnam experience on addressing the issue. Again, admittedly, this is no easy task, but it is possible. With that, I pass the floor back to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Hajar. That's fascinating, actually, and an interesting take that, in fact, C-band is the first band, and then we should be looking at some of the other bands, because I know there's a session following this one that's going to look at some of the alternative bands for 5G. Let's keep the momentum going and have our final speaker of the day, which is Mahanad Juad, who's a senior manager for spectrum policy at Intelsat. And I'm sure Mahanad is going to give us a slightly different take to that which we may have heard so far, one from the satellite industry. Mahanad, over to you, please.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm honored to be here again. This is my second time at the Asia Pacific Spectrum Conference. So I will try and wrap up this session and give you the perspective from the satellite point of view. So next slide, please, Richard. Basically, I'll go through a global perspective, the outcome from WRC 19, then home in specifically in the Asia region and look at the economic realities of spectrum. Look at some technical considerations of coexistence between FSS and 5G, and then finally I'll wrap up. So next slide, please, Richard. If you can, yes, thank you very much. Just a little bit of background post WRC 19. We can see in the gray area, this is where IMT was identified prior to 2019. So this was from the outcome from 2015 conference. And you can see clearly from all the three different regions that the common denominator where harmonization has been reached is between the 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz. When you look at the outcome from the recent conference in 2019, the box in the yellow highlight in region 1 shows the outcome. Obviously in region 1 there are 4 different regions, and because of that the outcome was slightly mixed in terms of the agenda item to be studied, which is agenda item 1.3 to look at elevating mobile from secondary to primary. Then when you look at region 2, it's a different agenda item 1.2, and here it's studying IMT identification. I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the 2 different regions. One is to study mobile, so that's not necessarily IMT or otherwise known as 5G. Mobile is for any other MS technology or application. Then you move into region 3, you can see that there was no agenda item to study either mobile or IMT above 3.6 gigahertz. And the dynamics are very similar to Africa, I would say, in region 1. The reason why Asia took that position, I believe, is because of the current usage in this region with satellite services. You have over 80 satellites serving Asia right now, providing over 3,800 TV channels. And that's an important indicator because of the resiliency of the propagation characteristics, why Asia chose to protect satellite post WRC 19. Total revenue generated is approximately 56 billion. So it's very important service that's being provided over this region. And therefore the outcome showed that from Asia. Next slide, please. And it's important because we've seen from every WRC, this agenda item keeps coming back in again to supply more spectrum for IMT. We believe that this creates an inefficiency and loss of value. Creating oversupply leads to inefficient use, lower auction proceedings, as we will see later on in the slides, and also spectrum may be unsold or worse off, left unused for longer periods. This simultaneously creates a negative impact on the essential services that have been provided by a proven technology, such as satellite services. When you compare the TV transmission that's been provided over Asia. So throwing more spectrum at 5G will not solve the connectivity problem. I believe that a balanced approach, the right policies to take a technology neutral look at a mix of technologies will enable better access and bridge the digital divide over Asia. Next slide, please. Is more spectrum needed, really? We believe not, and this is not because we're talking negatively about 5G. I believe that 5G is a benefit for everybody. In fact, satellite will play a role in 5G. But when you look at typical countries, you have 3 to 4 national MNOs making around 200 to 300 megahertz available, should provide 60 to 80 megahertz on average for each MNO. However, a recent study from Ofcom, after the initial phase of the hype of 5G, now we're looking at the auction phases around the world. It shows that the first 40 megahertz deployment of MNOs produces the most economic benefit to society. Beyond that, the value added is very marginal. And you can see that on the graph on the right-hand side. The bottom line shows the typical throughput speed you would achieve with just only 40 megahertz. That's around 770 megabits per second, far more than what you need for mobile broadband and live video. The Ofcom study actually looked at this post the auction that they've released, and it shows that, and I quote here, that there was no evidence that 5G could not be delivered with smaller, example, 40 megahertz blocks of non-contiguous carriers in other frequency bands, i.e. spectrum other than C-band. So I think the study shows that the myth about 80 to 100 megahertz per operator is not really supported by real-world cases. And this is quite important to note, particularly the aspect that non-contiguous carriers could provide throughput, high throughput speeds for 5G services. Next slide, please. And we can see this around the world. If you look at from the left-hand side in the Americas, the USA has 4 network operators, but they've auctioned 280 megahertz of C-band. Chile, 200 megahertz. Closer to Europe, Germany, 300, Italy, 200 megahertz. In fact, Vodacom in the UK have launched 5G services with just 50 megahertz. Closer to this region, Hong Kong, 300 megahertz has been auctioned. You have 4 MNOs in Hong Kong. And Singapore, where there is 4 MNOs, you have only 200 megahertz that's been auctioned for C-band. In Australia, Telstra actually launched 5G with just 60 megahertz. Next slide, please. And we can see that the mid-band spectrum is still available. There is a lot of spectrum that's still not yet licensed. And Richard knows very well this slide here. It shows from the ITU spectrum that's identified, around 915 if you look at the yellow line, horizontal line, 915 megahertz is actually they harmonize for mobile to be used. A lot of countries have not yet utilized that. Approximately 336 megahertz still is not licensed across many countries in Asia. So most harmonized spectrum, including mid-band spectrum, remains unused. Next slide, please. And there are other alternatives, refarming 2G and 3G networks. I think this is a most cost-effective way of doing it. It doesn't require additional spectrum if you refarm what you already have. Spectrum sharing, MNOs can actually share, just like satellite has been sharing effectively for decades. And there's also the millimeter waves. 26 gigahertz is available for high capacity alternatives. Next slide, please. So looking at the technical considerations, what happens if a country in your region has actually decided to look at 5G? Next slide, please. There are really two ways that 5G can interfere with satellite. If you compare the difference between the powers, the satellite signal is traveling 36,000 kilometers from the geostationary arc. By the time it reaches the Earth, the signal is very weak. So 5G interference from a base station nearby can actually saturate the LNB of the Earth station, even in adjacent bands. The other interference scenario is the out-of-band emissions. The 5G signals can cause interference to the satellite signal. How do you mitigate that? Next slide, please. The best way you can do that is a combination of factors, and we saw that in the previous colleague's presentation. It's a combination of a guard band to allow the filter enough bandwidth to transition and operate. Alongside that, to improve the separation distance, registration of Earth stations is warranted, and it's important to do so. And then the last thing is the out-of-band emissions. How do you control that? The best way to do that is by not necessarily following the 3GPP power limits, because they are very stringent and impact on the satellite side, but to try and look at a case-by-case basis. A combination of these four factors can determine the size of the guard band that is actually needed. And you see on the box here on the right-hand side, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan have reduced different sizes of guard band because of the dynamics in each country. But a combination of these four factors enables possible coexistence. Next slide, please. So my final thoughts is, number one, C-band FSS is critical because of the reach. It facilitates intercontinental communications, especially in Southeast Asia, the economics where thousands of Earth stations have already been installed, TV stations receiving important sport channels and different direct-to-home TV transmissions, and the resilience of C-band. Because of the subtropical climate in Southeast Asia, that resilience is very important. Then the next message is the balance between the needs of the different stakeholders. Each market is different. Just because in Europe or USA one direction has gone, it doesn't mean Asia can follow the same direction, because the dynamics and the region is different. Harmonization, as much as possible, as we saw in the first slide, is up to 3.6 gigahertz, where global harmonization is the common denominator. And also to license the current spectrum, there is a big gap between what's already harmonized and what is yet to be licensed. And the third message is that there are other options. Refarming, as I mentioned, looking at the 2.3 or 2.6 gigahertz, and the 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz can be shared between MNOs in most cases, especially with new 5G base stations. And the final message is, if an administration has decided to go down the route of looking at C-band FSS to coexist with 5G, then a number of mitigation techniques, such as identifying where the Earth stations are, providing filters to enable the guard band to operate, but also to look at the 5G base stations, 5G masks, and try to ensure that the mask does not saturate the adjacent services that are used, not just for FSS, but also above 4.2 gigahertz, like altimeter services. So with that, I conclude my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. An interesting set of presentations, and slightly different, but not necessarily conflicting takes on the situation. We've also had the results of the poll come in. I'm going to come on to those in a second, because We've got about 20 minutes to go and try and discuss some of the questions. I've noticed one particular topic has cropped up in a couple of the questions, both from Bashir Patel and from Anna Christina. And it's something I wanted to ask myself, which is that looking at, for example, the plan for 5G spectrum in Vietnam, the plan in potentially Indonesia, the plan in Singapore, the plan in Malaysia, they're not the same, which means that you'll have 5G base stations in one country which are potentially co-channel with satellite and FSS reception in another neighboring country. And both Bashir and Anna have asked the question, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with not causing interference to your neighbors and their use of the spectrum? Anwar, I'm going to start with you. Just very brief answers, because there's a lot of things we need to discuss. And then Hajar and then Mohammed. So Anwar, you first, please.
Thank you very much, Richard. So as I have presented that we have actually, there are many techniques that we can protect the satellite from the interference from 5G base stations. And then among those techniques, I think in each country, they may select the most appropriate technique, the most simple technique, the most cheap technique for each country. And then, and maybe country by country, they are different because the environment is different. I think the characteristic of the channel is also different. And actually, the important part is when we are neighboring, neighboring countries. So, for example, Indonesia and Malaysia. So, in that case, I think we need more discussion in that case. But among inside the country, I think it is a little bit we can solve for that. So that's my comment.
Okay, Hajar, your thoughts on how you deal with the neighbors?
Thanks, Richard. Agree that this is actually a main issue. Even the discussion on border coordination at the national level, for example, in Malaysia, has been sort of discussed heavily. But I think the first way to do this is to have that a platform where all countries and neighboring countries can get together and to discuss the issue, and that is set to sort of set the scene to actually discuss on what are the mitigations that they can use or to actually address the interference if there's any. So I think basically you need a platform. But if I'm not mistaken, regulators do, especially in neighboring countries, do meet on a regular basis through like a joint task force group or something to that effect to discuss on spectrum interference issue. So I think that platform could be used to actually discuss interference in C-band as well.
Mohammed, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think the key word here is harmonization. If you can actually harmonize to the extent possible, then you mitigate a lot of the coordination issues. And that's why being part of the ITU family is very important, and respecting the outcome from the ITU, it provides that regulatory certainty for everybody. So trying to harmonize, we can see that 3.4 to 3.6 has been globally as much as possible harmonized, so that if you would operate within that band, then you would mitigate that coordination issue. If not, then mitigation measures such as a PFD mask between two neighboring countries would have to be provided in a footnote, for example.
Okay, I mean, so I'm going to move on to a slightly more technical issue after this, but I know from experience, for example, that in Indonesia, all the ATMs use C-band satellites. So there's quite a few. I think you only said there's 1,000, but I suspect there's more than 1,000 ATMs. And in Malaysia, all the petrol stations, all the gas stations do their transactions via C-band dishes. So, you know, we're not talking about one or two. We're talking about thousands or tens of thousands. And again, you know, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, you're all very close to each other, and yet looking at different band plans. The next thing I wanted to pick up on was this. We've had a number of compatibility studies, and it's a shame that Long isn't here with us to help contribute to this. But my understanding of the studies that have been done are that you have considered the compatibility between a 5G base station and a satellite receiver. But we're actually talking about a network of 5G base stations that might be every 200 or 300 meters, and potentially a network of satellite receivers that might also be every 200 or 300 meters. So does this change the mitigations that we need? I mean, is it still reasonable to, for example, Anwar, you mentioned shielding. Can we really shield if we have a complete network of base stations and a network of dishes? Let's go back in the same order. Anwar, we'll start with you because I know you've looked at this issue.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, but this is very good and very interesting questions and also discussions. I think especially for the ATM machine, because we are using VSAT for the ATM machines and the location is very close to each other. So to the best of my knowledge, we can use the fiber optic for that. We can replace that machine with fiber optic or another technique when we want to implement the 5G using that C-band. And then after that, because we cannot put the shield, right? And then after that is we use a smart antenna, but in that case, if too crowded, it's also very difficult to to design smart antenna. But in some areas, maybe when it is possible, and then we use another technique. That's why first of all, we investigate what kind of technique that we can use, and then maybe location by location, they cannot be the same. They may be different, and then maybe one solution, one technique cannot fit all locations of Indonesia, for example. This is what I got from this. Yeah.
Quickly around to Hajar, because I know you have to go soon, and we want to look at the polls as well. Hajar, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
I think this is where coordination among the affected stakeholder is very important. Agree. Even in Malaysia, for example, we have a large number of VSATs going around, and I think it's difficult to even that. I think the challenge for Malaysia, for example, for VSAT. These are all on-class licenses, meaning they're not registered. So it makes it even harder for us to actually do coordination. But I think we have to start somewhere. I mean, a theoretical coexistence studies with whatever data that you could gather is the first place to start. Again, coordination is very important.
Mohammed, quickly from you.
Yeah, thanks. I think Hajar mentioned a very important point, which you alluded to, Richard. A lot of these Earth stations are actually receive only. So they're not licensed and they're not registered. So it's almost a case of out of sight, out of mind, whereas you actually see the mobile hand phone in your pocket. Earth stations are everywhere, especially in Southeast Asia. There are thousands, as you mentioned, and providing critical services in many cases for civil aviation authorities, for example. But the best way from what we've learned as a satellite operator is the measurements that we've done is a combination of 4 factors, really. A guard band, if an administration has decided to look at 5G, a guard band with a filter would mitigate a lot of that interference. But what we've noticed is that the 3GPP standard levels of 5G masts are actually quite harmful to the FSS. So we've seen some of the auctions that are happening in Europe. They don't actually follow the 3GPP power levels exactly. So they've looked at this and they've looked at other power levels to mitigate the out-of-band emissions that would be causing interference to the FSS in the adjacent side. So please talk to us. I mean, as a satellite operator, we're here to help. We'll provide our experience because we've done a lot of measurements, and I've been speaking to Hajar and Anwar before the session, and hopefully we'll continue that dialogue going forward, because lessons learned from both industry would help provide the certainty for everybody.
That's excellent. So we have a couple of polls that we asked, a couple of questions we asked the audience, and it's worth just having a look at those results, because having seen what they are, I'm actually quite surprised at the results we got. So what the first question we asked, or one of the questions we asked, was how strongly should C-band satellite services be protected from 5G interference? And we had a range of possible responses from let's forget C-band completely to we should protect all C-band services. And the reason I say this is a surprising result is that the number one answer with 51%, which, you know, if we were doing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire would be a kind of winning audience vote, is that 51% say all C-band satellite services should be protected. And the second highest answer was that 5G is more important maybe in some areas, maybe cities, but not necessarily across a whole country. So we'll bear that in mind, because the next question was then who should pay if we need to take mitigation. Mohammed, you've mentioned already filters, and Anwar, you've mentioned shielding. Who should pay for that? And the range of responses we had were the 5G operators themselves, the regulator or the government, those who actually watch and use the C-band services, or maybe the satellite companies. And 49%, again, you know, if you were betting on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you might go with that answer, is the mobile operators, the 5G operators should be the ones that pay to have the filters fitted. And given what we've said about the number of devices that are present in the countries that may be unregistered but may actually be providing critical services, I think that's, again, a very interesting outcome. So let's just briefly look at that second issue, because the technical one we can discuss. The question then is who should pay. I'm going to start, Hajar, with you as a mobile operator. How do you feel about being put on the line here for paying for all these mitigations, for paying for all of Anwar's shielding?
Okay, I think it is understood that there's a cost to do this. I mean, there's no such thing as free lunch, right? If you want something, you got to pay for it. But I think if push comes to shove, I think operators are willing to bear the cost, whether it is a partial or a full cost. I think that is another issue that we need to agree on between the affected stakeholders. I think in terms of cost, I think it should be reasonable. Again, what is reasonable? That is something that needs to be discussed and agreed upon with the affected stakeholders. But I think it is important to note that for every dollars that operators have to pay in order to gain access to the spectrum, be it in the form of compensation, compensating the migration, or even upfront acquisition spectrum fees, it will affect the ability for operators to invest into their network. So in principle, we can say that the cost has to be reasonable enough that it will not have an adverse impact to the ability of mobile operators in investing or building their network in order to deliver 5G.
Thank you, Hajar. I believe you have to leave us at this point. So let me just say thank you extremely very much for your input and commentary. It's been fantastic to hear your side of things as well. Let me wish you all the best and good health, and enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Hajar.
Bye.
So continuing on that theme, let's go round to you, Mohammed. Are you happy that the mobile operators are the ones who feel should be paying for this?
Well, maybe I'll just want to comment on the first poll first, Richard, that the 51% of respondents think that satellite remains, strong in Southeast Asia, and this is because of the type of applications that are being provided in this region, but also because of the resiliency. You really cannot have any better SLA, the 5 nines in terms of the quality of service for transmissions than in C-band for satellite. But there was another interesting poll that was shown yesterday about what is the dominant technology for the foreseeable future in terms of the terrestrial side. And the respondent, I believe, were quite overwhelmingly towards, for the next 5 years, it will be 4G, not 5G. So this is resonating with what the poll is saying today. I think consumers recognize that the value of C-band satellite is important. It needs to be protected. As towards shielding, I think shielding can be effective when it looks at teleports and large earth stations, but when you look at consumer premises, there is really no alternative than to provide the filters and the guard band. I think regulators have an important responsibility to provide the policy and the direction for setting the scene and who subsidizes this, whether it's the regulatory authority or the newcomer, and in this case, the mobile network operator, to coordinate with the incumbent. i.e. the satellite. I think that's a good way forward, but it needs the regulatory policy to set that direction in the right way.
Which brings us back around to one of my initial statements, as we have technical issues and we have policy issues. Anwar, have you thought at all in your study what the scale of costs might be?
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, and also Mohammed. First, I think I will talk first about what happened in Japan when they are making the coexistence between even not 5G but 4G and satellite. So when the Japan released 5G band, and they also have the problem of coexistence, and then I asked them that who should pay for the for the management of the coexistence, and then they said that no one paid. So this is what the Japan did. And then how can you do that? They say that first they know the location of each Earth station, and then after that the 4G base station they locate such that they will not interfere to the Earth station. So this is what we learn from Japan about the coexistence between 4G and satellite. And then I asked them what about 5G. They said because they are successful in 4G, and then the similar they can do for 5G. So regarding to this polling about who should pay for the mitigations between satellite and 5G. So if we need to pay something, and then I suggest that maybe operator plus government, they discuss each other. And then
well, I guess the thing is, Anwar, if the operators are paying to get access to the spectrum and giving money to the government, and then the government then use that for mitigation, it's still the operator that pays. Right? We're very much coming towards the end of our time now. I think one thing that's very interesting from what I've heard of both from the questions and from what's been said, and you know, Mohammed, you pointed this out as well, is that people thought that we maybe are looking at a 5 to 10 year period before we start to see significant rollout of 5G. If that's the case, that gives us time to work out some of these compatibility issues in a less rushed way. And maybe we're rushing, maybe we're trying to force something that we actually, if we just sat back as a region and said, okay, let's work out how we're going to do this. Let's look at the interests of all the operators, whether it's Vinasat in Vietnam or Miasat in Malaysia or Palapa in Indonesia or any of the other China Sats. And then we all work together and pull that together and do that as a region and do it slowly and think about it carefully. I think maybe from what we're hearing, there's some mileage in doing that, and it wouldn't delay 5G that significantly given the timescale that we've heard. We've got literally no time left. I just want to pass back very, very briefly, Mohammed and Anwar. This was done yesterday. Your Twitter tweet about what you've heard, your 160 characters wrap up of your take on where we are with 5G in C-band. And I'll go, Anwar, to you first.
Okay, so about 5 to 10 years after now, and then I think, we can do many good things, coordination especially, and then after that, with the target of the, for example, in our case that might be 5G, we can implement this a lot, and then also we can make the harmonizations, and also they both can work together in every country. So do I answer your questions?
I think you used slightly more than 160 characters, but no, that's very useful. Thank you, Anwar. Mohammed, over to you.
Just to wrap up, I think satellite continues to play an important role in your region. The growth in C-band is evident by the amount of investment that's gone in and the services that are being provided. I think each region is different. Please don't look at one region, what applies there would apply to you. I think the markets are different from one region to another, so you can't have a wholesale approach everywhere. The notion of 80 to 100 megahertz contiguous spectrum, I think, has been debunked by various studies. Now that we're seeing auctions around the world taking place, that's not really what's happening from the MNOs who are actually purchasing the spectrum. I think the MNOs have invested a huge amount of sums of money on 4G, and that's why we believe that it will be the dominant technology for the foreseeable future. While, as you mentioned, during that time, it's sensible to take a balanced approach to protect both services and allow innovation and prosperity for both. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you also to Hajar, and thank you to Long, who for his presentation as well. An absolutely fascinating session, and I suspect we could have gone on for another hour at least with question and answers on that. One thing I'll just say from an LS Telecom perspective is we actually have a training course coming up in September on 5G and fixed satellite compatibility, and we'll look at all the issues and the kind of things Anwar's been looking at. So if you want to join us for that, please do. Once again, my thanks very much to the speakers today. I think we've had a fantastic session, and I hope that all of you that have joined us have also enjoyed it. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Richard. And yeah, I'd like to echo your thanks to the speakers, and also thanks to you for excellently moderating the session and the discussion as well. So I think you're right in saying, Richard, that we could have gone on for a lot longer. If it's okay with everyone, I know there were quite a few questions that we weren't able to get round to. So if it's okay, Anwar, Mohaned, and Richard and the others, we'll send you over the questions that were asked afterwards. And if there are any that you wanted to respond to offline, you can, because there were quite a few questions coming in. And so we'll do that anyway. So thank you very much to everyone for that. So we now have a short break. We have 30 minutes break. We do again have the networking area of the platform now open. So if you wanted to take 15 minutes or so of the break to go and do a quick bit of networking, again, you need to navigate to the networking area using the left-hand menu bar. Head to the networking area. You can then have the chance to meet up with fellow attendees. You'll get matched with fellow attendees, have a brief conversation, and you can even choose to exchange contact details as well. So please do go and try out the networking area, and then yeah, have a short break after that, and we'll be back here on the main stage in 30 minutes time for our next session. We're continuing the focus on mid-band spectrum, but we're looking beyond the C-band. So we're looking at other possible options in the mid bands for 5G 5G spectrum, and looking more broadly at the mid-band ecosystem. So looking forward to that. That'll be back here in 30 minutes time. But once again, thank you to Richard, thank you to Anwar, Mohaned, and to all of our speakers from today. And as I said, looking forward to seeing you back here in 30 minutes for the next session. Thank you.